Welcome to Focused on Forward. The purpose of this podcast is to focus on recovery from life situations, be it a disease, chronic or acute, perhaps the loss of someone so dear to you in death, or a change of life patterns that has affected you so profoundly that you have no choice but to find your new normal and become focused on moving forward. Each episode is designed to show the positivity that people bring to each and every one of their stories, the successes they've had, ways that they have become so definitively focused on moving forward. We look forward to sharing their stories, and we hope that they inspire you just as much as they have inspired us. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. Focused on Forward. Today, we're talking with Joshua Stockbridge. Josh has an interesting story that's going to talk about him and his daughter and the story of their successes and how they've gotten to the point where they are. So welcome, Josh. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share what I've gone through.
Good. Yeah. Our whole purpose here in doing this is that we want people to be able to look at everyone's different life experiences and see if there's some strength that they can draw from it. And maybe it was something that will encourage them and help them to keep moving forward, even though life has thrown some struggles their way. So we're anxiously waiting to hear your story. So
sure.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. So, I guess my story started with the challenges I faced on my own as a young person. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, arthritis. I was diagnosed with the beginning stages at age 10. Had a lot of just things stacking up, and then eventually I ended up getting married to my wife, who we've been married for about 7 years now. And we had a car crash probably about 5 years ago. And after that car crash, I couldn't walk or stand for more than about 15 to 20 minutes at a time. So that was really difficult to deal with. And on top of all that, I had a lot of brain fog and stuff from the fibromyalgia and all that stuff. And it just made everything harder. I was a server at a restaurant that made fairly decent money, and then I wasn't able to walk or stand anymore after the accident. So it just aggravated everything on top of everything. And because I already had pain in my feet and legs and everything like that, and the car crash just pushed that right over the edge. So yeah, I guess that's where it ended up as far as the physical pain. Shortly after that, I ended up losing my job as a server. I then ended up getting a job selling insurance, mainly due to the fog and everything like that. That was even hard to upkeep for myself. Then eventually they wanted to work me about 60 hours a week and things like that till I started selling. I wasn't about to have that, so I ended up having to try to find something else. So I eventually did, but after that, my wife became pregnant, and that was all good news and whatnot. I was able to find some work doing more sales and whatnot. That was really fun, going business to business and et cetera. Kind of made my own schedule to some extent, so it was a little easier on me physically. However, at about 27 weeks into the pregnancy, Michaela started having bleeding, and we eventually needed to, we went to the hospital. Before this, I'm sorry, she was diagnosed with placenta previa, which is a condition in which the placenta will literally attach over the opening of the cervix so that the baby will not be able to get out once they go into labor. So she had a absolutely, I forget exactly what they call it, fully effaced or whatever, but basically it was covering it entirely. There was no way for the baby to get out. So the only option was C-section. And, this is the only time where I thought to myself, wow, I'm kind of glad I was born in this era because, we have C-section and we have things like that. Yeah.
Medical advances.
In the past, it would have just been that she would have been dead. I mean, that's what would have happened. And that's how it used to happen is severe cases of placenta previa like that. There was nothing they could do. they would bleed out. So,
Right.
but what did end up happening is she started early bleeding, which has a higher risk of happening when you have placenta previa. And so she bled, and I remember rushing home from work. Luckily, I only worked 5 minutes away. I rushed home from work and then rushed her to the hospital. And then they ended up doing an emergency C-section, and we had a 27-weeker. So she was born at 1 pound and 15 ounces. And she was micropreemie. Funny story, we had already come up with a name beforehand. Her name was going to be Kara. But my wife, we have this funny thing with names. I don't like just any name, so she just keeps throwing names out there. I'm like, no. And I shoot down like every single one. She really wanted the name Lena. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I don't like that name, no. But then she said, what about Carolina? And when she said Carolina, I was like, yeah, that's it. We'll do that. Like, because I like that. So when she was sitting on...
Oddly enough, my wife and I, we always joke that with our daughter, our third child, that we nearly got divorced over her. So
that's hilarious.
So same thing. We would throw names at each other all the time.
Nothing, just, sticks.
Nothing stuck till about I think about 2-3 weeks before she was born. Then we're like,
Perfect.
oh, Kendall, it's gonna be Kendall.
So she was sitting there on the. They let me go into the room with the C-section and support her. She was sitting there, and she just all this. I wanted to spell Carolina Karaleena because it just looks like now nobody has problems pronouncing that, but she wanted it spelled Caralena, so 1 E and a C instead of a K and 2 E's. So and she just like blackmailed me sitting there on the table. I don't know if she's gonna live or die. She just goes, please spell it how I want it, and I'm like, sure, whatever you want, babe. Yes. It's like, if we weren't in a critical situation right now, I would have fought for that, but no. So that was pretty funny. She came out crying, which was rare. It's rare for a premature baby to do that, but she actually came out pretty good. We ended up knowing somebody who was the operating nurse, which was really amazing. So it was nice to have somebody we knew just in that operating room, because they were very familiar with our wishes and whatnot there as well, and our medical everything. So that was really, really handy.
Excellent.
Then
nice.
Then Carolina, she had to be helicoptered to U of M in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, and so they were packing her up and whatnot. I ended up beating the helicopter to U of M, mainly because they had a lot of stuff to do and whatnot. I was only speeding a little, not that much. But I
can imagine.
Yeah. So we ended up getting to the hospital, and my wife had to stay behind for 3 days to heal from the C-section. She couldn't be moved. So she didn't get to meet Carolina for very long until 3 days later.
Wow.
Sorry. That was the hardest part, for sure. That was the hardest part, was, being without my wife in the NICU with my daughter for those days. But I had a lot of support. I can
imagine.
A lot of good friends who'd stop and visit, who heard about it and would come and visit us. So, but all I could do was go in there and put my hand on Carolina. And I did that because you can't brush their skin or anything. It's like a butterfly's wing, but you're allowed to put your hand on them. And so just place it and hold it still. And the thing is that physical touch is also so important for babies. I mean, they will, their mortality rates will go up without physical touch, without actually being there or holding them. And I got to go ahead.
So in that instance, I'm sorry, just a quick question just popped in my head. So in that instance, are you allowed skin to
Yes.
skin contact, or was it? Or
Yes,
did
we
you have
allowed
to
skin
be
to skin.
gloved up
There's
or
a,
something
a
along
hand
those lines?
sanitizer station right outside the room. You used it every time you came in and out.
Okay, excellent.
But yeah, because
Yeah.
it was really important to have that skin to skin. And I think the next most memorable thing was holding her for the first time. It was like wearing a bracelet. It was like she wasn't even there, and that was scary for me because my daughter was, I couldn't feel her on me. She was so light. But we had some. The journey was definitely a long one. It was 2 months. We ended up living in the hospital. However, that is not nearly as long as obviously some others that were there in adjacent rooms. Some people were there for over a year with their baby. It was just like incredible.
Oh my!
So we ended up making some friends here and there and whatnot, and some of the other parents. So that was we did. She did end up having a bladder infection. She also ended up having due to that they gave her antibiotics. They accidentally overdosed her with antibiotics, which could have caused permanent kidney failure. Luckily, she ended up the kidney failure reversed itself.
We went through a similar situation with Kendall last year while we were in the ICU. They gave her too aggressive of a dose, and it shut down her kidneys for almost a week and a half. But it was slowly reversing itself afterwards.
How old was Kendall?
Yeah, it's very scary.
12. Yeah.
At 12.
So with micro preemies, everything happens like 50 times as fast because of how small they are. So her kidneys shut down, I think, for like a few days or something like that, or a day. I don't remember. But that's also why a bladder infection is such a big deal. Was because you could get a bladder infection that will quickly turn around, and a premature baby can die like within a day or two of just a bladder infection. And they're also very, very common for premature babies. I don't know why, possibly because they don't have as many defenses. I mean, part of it, that is it. I mean, their immune system is practically non-existent. So,
well, yeah,
but
that makes sense.
So everything happens like really quickly. So we were actually really lucky to have a lot of the medical professionals and whatnot there, especially the nurses, who were just they could just look at her and go, something's not right. And so they would just, they'd order the panel, right? And these nurses, they have to go to school for it's like the longest schooling you ever have to do as a nurse or a doctor for that matter. I think the doctors have to go for like 20 years.
Right.
From around that realm. And the nurse is like 10 or 12 or something. But yeah, our nurse just eyeballed her and just went, yeah, something's not quite right. And, I'm going to order, panels to see if she has infections. And that's when they narrowed down the bladder infection. So we went through all that. And her Massimo is what they call it, which is basically a respiratory indicator of how well she's breathing. Just was always getting better and better and better. And, after about 2 months, we were able to go home with her. So we brought her home at just under 4 pounds. And I think the thing I learned from that was that there's a lot we can do. I was forced to advocate for my daughter. I was forced to do anything I could. Now, I wasn't a medical professional, right? But what I could do was ask questions and learn about everything I possibly could to try to make the most informed decision. So that's practically was my time in the NICU. If it wasn't on my phone or talking with friends, I was just doing research or something along those lines.
I can understand that.
Yeah. And it also helped me realize that maybe there's more I could do for myself. Maybe there was more I could do for my health and whatnot. And that was part of the thoughts that helped me going down the road, because my wife has some medical issues. I obviously had medical issues, and now my daughter was born with medical issues. And now I need to figure out how are we going to even survive? with
Sure.
all
Yeah.
with all of these medical issues coming our way. So I ended up bringing home my daughter, and shortly after I did that, I was let go of my job. So the job that I did have, they let me go. I wasn't performing, quite obviously. I realized later that some of the, I guess, symptoms I was having, I didn't realize I was having symptoms, but because I felt kind of fine. But now I recognize those as like symptoms of PTSD. I didn't realize that I was even that far gone. Like, you don't realize it in the moment a lot of times. But
no, that hits you.
Yeah. And then I was like, oh wow, that kind of screwed me up in certain ways. But I'm always working on that and whatnot. And I really liked the premise of the podcast too that you have going on here, because I always feel that there is no other way to take things than focusing on forward, right? Than actually making ourselves stronger from these situations, because you can go through anything. You can go through even worse things than us. You can go through absolute just torture, and you can still come out learning from it. There's an illustration I love, and I've always kept in mind, which is you can take things like an egg, you can take things like a carrot or a coffee bean, and our environment is a boiling pot of water. And when you place these things in a boiling pot of water, the carrot gets soft and mushy. The egg gets hard. And the coffee bean, though, turns the water into something, right? And it is actually useful. Now, the egg, we don't want to become hard to our problems. We don't want to make us into a hard person. The carrot, we don't want it to make us into a soft, sensitive person. But rather, we want to just become better and make ourselves more useful to the world around us as well. So I always try to keep that in mind.
I want you to know I'll be stealing that illustration. Sure. I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
No, that's very nice. That's a similar thought pattern to the whole premise behind this is, how do we make ourselves better in dealing with the situations that life is inevitably going to throw at.
And it's important to process things properly, though. I went to some therapy sessions, because it wasn't easy to deal with some of the things that we experienced and seen in the NICU, and I would talk. My therapist pointed this out, that I did this all the time. I would talk about a problem, and then immediately afterwards, I would say, "But I learned that." And she was like, "Okay, but Josh, you keep saying, but you learned that. And I'm glad you're taking the positive from these things." But she's like, "But didn't it just suck?" I'm like, "Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it did." And she's like, "Well, like, just make sure that, you're processing that fully, that, that sucked. That really stunk."
Yeah.
And and it's okay to have those feelings, but it's just proper to balance those with, we still got to be moving forward, and we do got to learn from them. So I take a practice of, if I'm feeling a feeling, I'll go ahead and kind of set a sort of mental time limit on it, and I'll go ahead and feel it for a while, and then I'll just let it go. And I can say, okay, now I acknowledged it. Now I can move on, and kind of doing that in a very cognitive way, in a very like, hey, I see you kind of way to your own feelings, has really helped me a lot.
We do kind of a similar thing at our house, and a lot of it's based on the therapy sessions that we had as well. Because coming out of it, out of our situation, I didn't realize that I was going through some forms of post-traumatic stress. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I wasn't, I was grumpy all the time, and a lot of other things, and and I wouldn't. And we had a very similar conversation with my therapist. I did, about the fact that it was okay to acknowledge that these things suck, and that they do shape your view on things, and it's okay to acknowledge those things, but
It's who's steering the boat. Are you steering the boat, or are you allowing your feelings to steer the boat? And so her and I had a long talk about it, and so in our house, it's okay. So you're having an off day. It happens. That's fine. Take your day, have your off day. But tomorrow, when you wake up and the sun shines, it's a new day, new feelings, new emotions. Don't bring yesterday's issues into tomorrow. That's kind of how we've gone about it. And even sometimes it's okay. It's now the afternoon. Don't bring this morning's issues into the afternoon. We've tried to even compress that down further, so we're not focusing so much on the negative, but trying to focus on how we keep moving forward.
And along with that, I gotta say the most effective thing that I think anybody could do is focus on some form of a gratefulness practice. You need to be grateful about anything. I'm grateful for even some of the bad things that happen. And I don't mean that they happened and that's why I'm grateful. I mean that I've gone through that I can now help others, that I can now do things with the information that I now have by going through that.
Yes.
And there's so much to be grateful over, even with the negative things. And that can be really, really healing if you allow it to be. It's really hard to get anxious, to be sad, to be anything when you are just grateful. So take a step back and just, think about what you're grateful for.
As I tell people all the time, there's a silver lining in everything if you're willing to look for it, and even with Kendall's stay in the hospital, there was definite silver linings there. And our stay in the hospital, the last year of our life, even with the shelter in place issues that we have here in Michigan right now, there's silver linings to that. And every day I find a way to be grateful and be thankful for each thing that's going on. And I agree with you 100% on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we need to, and being grateful helps you take advantage of things like that, right? Because if you're focused on gratefulness, then, when something happens like a stay-at-home order, you can go, oh, I get to spend time with my family and I get to plant a garden and work on the house and get 18 chickens and build a chicken coop. That's what I ended up doing.
I don't know about the chickens, but we did do the garden. And, happy to spend time with family. I don't know about the chickens, though. Not for me. But
yeah, we grew up with them. Our family did. So I'm pretty. The kids love them too. They hug them and pet them and all sorts of fun stuff. It's hilarious. But so when you're focused on gratefulness, you can see what you can take advantage of in the moment instead of just letting everything wear you down and then not taking advantage of where you're at and what moments you're in. So.
Nice. Yeah. So let's flash forward a little bit. So now you brought her home. You said she was about 4 pounds. So she was little. Your dad showed me a picture of her laying on the bed lined up next to a bunch of other little dolls. And it took me a moment to pick her out of the photo. I was like, oh, there she is. I actually had to blow up the picture a little bit to be able to see the differences. So with all of that and coming home at that size, what challenges did you have to face with her then?
So I'd say, in the NICU, the machine goes off every 3 seconds a lot of times, and it's because their heart stops, especially in the first month. Their heart stops, 100 times a day. So it's really that noise I still carry with me in my head sometimes and in my dreams. But that, so, I looked back on that and realized that I was getting maybe an hour of sleep each night. I mean, there was not much sleeping and, that alone will drive you nuts. But, not only that, one significant time she had aspirated on her own, spit up and, just turned totally blue and was limp. And, so I had to do, luckily you're mandated to learn CPR and things like that before you exit the NICU. So I practiced what I learned, and luckily she was able to get the spit up out of her lungs. And, we called the doctor and just told them what happened and everything. And they said, okay, just, keep an eye on her. She should be okay. And all that kind of stuff. But she cried for a good, full hour after that, just crying and crying and crying. And, because it was obviously scary for her too. And then, I remember I was so tough throughout that whole thing. And then after she finally fell asleep in my arms, I just lost it, and my, then it was my turn.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That was probably the scariest moment. I think the most challenging. She's honestly not been too much of a challenge, but really, I think just keeping an eye on everything, keeping an eye on her immune system. We actually, we couldn't let anybody hold her. We had to be the only ones, essentially. And that's not because we're paranoid parents. It's because it was doctor's orders. So part of the challenge was explaining that to people. No, you can't really hold my baby. Sorry. So that only lasted a few months or something, though. So, and that was mainly when you were in public places. She wasn't allowed to be held. But if you had, like the grandparents, definitely we let them hold her, right? That was I gotta say that was probably a big challenge. The other thing, just making sure that we were feeding her right too, because and this actually helped me to end up losing 100 pounds, because I was focused on my daughter's health and my wife's health.
Wow!
I found a resource that was it was a podcast, and I started listening to it because a brother, there was a friend of mine who had he was a buyer at a grocery chain, and so he had a lot of contacts with other companies and whatnot. So he started reaching out to them, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do some demonstrations?" And some demonstrations is like those people who hand you something on a toothpick to have you try it. Yeah,
and
I was like,
here's this kielbasa. Give this a try.
Yeah. So that's what I started doing. Is I started doing demonstrations for all these companies. Well, I wanted to do good work. So one of the companies that I had gotten is called Bulletproof, and they are an excellent company. But I started to look into their podcasts, and because of their podcasts, I was able to figure out really why the heck I was in all this pain all the time, and also why I was overweight and couldn't lose weight and all this other stuff. It was a really wonderful resource. It helped me help my wife. I ended up being able to be like, "So honey, I figured out what was wrong with you today." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I explained it all to her, and she's like, "Yeah, that's like spot on." And so anyway, it just started
That seems like that could have been a loaded sentence going into that. Hey, I figured out what's wrong with you.
Yeah, luckily she has a decent sense of humor, so she'd have had to marry me.
That would be helpful. So no time required on the couch. Then
yeah,
you were all set.
Yep. Anyways, there was so many like little things about health and nutrition and wellness that I learned through those podcasts, and that just made me look into other resources, and it got all the way into just reading medical articles and also scholarly articles and whatnot that are posted online by NCBI and all these other. I just started reading through them, and if I didn't know something, I'd look it up, and I just gained a really big interest in the human body and how it functions and all this stuff. And it ended up helping me and my family overcome a lot. So my fibromyalgia ended up also disappearing. I can now stand for as long as I want. I can walk for as long as I want without my feet hurting, legs hurting. I don't get random pain anymore.
That's
I don't
amazing.
get random skin pain. I don't get headaches. I had a headache about every single day of my life since the age of 12. Oh
wow!
It literally, it was just something that I was accustomed to. It became something that was just normal to me. So I think part of the challenge, and really, I think because of the NICU and because of all this stuff, I really had to like disown myself, in a sense, and because I was focused so much on my daughter that, it's like, okay, you got to give up sugar. Okay, well, I was kind of like, I don't really care. Sure, I'll do it. Like I was kind of like, I don't care about myself anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And like, it's not going to kill you to give it up for a while. Like same with anything else. Like if you want to try going gluten-free, or if you want to try going sugar-free or whatever, it's not going to kill you to try. So why not try? Right. So, and when I ended up trying,
Right.
and I eliminated certain things out of my diet and whatnot and gave it a go, I ended up losing 100 pounds and figured out exactly what was causing my headaches, my joint pain, and now I can correlate all of those to very specific foods. So, yeah. And
yeah, that's interesting.
So anyways, doing a lot of research on that stuff, I realized that, you know, food is medicine to a lot of people, because you know, to me it is, because medicine is something that gives you a very specific reaction to your body, and food does that to me, right? If I know if I eat this certain food that I'm going to have X reaction, so I will stay away from that certain food. But at the same time, the point is that you know, I became a much healthier person, and I went from a dad thinking that I was going to be kind of crippled and not be able to play with my family to somebody who is self-sufficient, and who, in the sense that I was making a living, in the sense that I was going to be able to play with my daughter and now my son as well. And I also lost all the weight and et cetera. And it's just my wife is getting over a lot of her conditions or whatnot. It's still been a journey figuring out everything with her. But we're like, I want to say about 90% there with her. She's doing amazing. And
well, that's awesome.
Yeah. So part of the challenges was just getting down and dirty and doing it. But they weren't too challenging because of just my mentality at the time was like, I don't really care about myself. You know, I don't really, you know, I took those, the PTSD not eating thing to another level, because I was just like, well, you know, I might as well eat just whatever to stay alive. So I don't care what it is.
Right.
So, yeah, that was about it.
Interesting. Okay. So you said that you have a gratefulness practice, and you talked about that for a moment. Now, how does that gratefulness of practice affect your planning for moving forward?
That's a good question. You know, it helps me just recognize the most important things, really, and what I should be grateful for. What am I focusing on right now? Versus what should I be focusing on? So, you know, gratefulness helps me prioritize, and having that practice and whatnot, and just meditating. You know, what should I be grateful for right now, especially when I'm in a foul mood? We all have those times. I'll get in a foul mood or something like that, and then I just recognize. And it's sometimes it's the hardest thing to do is to take a step back, because it's like you just want to be in a foul mood sometimes. So, so I'm like, you know what? No, I gotta take a step back, figure out what I'm grateful for, and you know, it's not about me, right? It's not about me, and that I want to feel bad.
Right,
it's about next steps.
So, how old is
she? Just turned 4 May 9th.
4 now, and
she's 100% normal. Just yep. She's.
That's amazing.
I mean, we were just talking the other day. She's she went from like the 1 percentile as far as a growth chart and stuff goes, to the 16th percentile right now. So that means that she's completely normal.
Oh, nice.
There's nothing wrong with her. You know,
that's great.
A lot of her organs and stuff are going to remain immature, but they still live full lives. They don't. There's no difference between them and another human being, really. I mean, she's going to have some reduced kidney function to some extent, but you just keep an eye on it.
Okay.
You know, and that's.
So there will be some things impacting her for the future, but nothing.
Yeah, it's more like it can.
Per se.
But it's
right
with her and with a lot of our dietary changes and et cetera, it's really, really low chance because, you're just reducing the statistics with every, every positive thing you do for her health. So.
Okay. And now you said
Samson.
You have a son
He's,
as well?
about almost 2 years old.
Okay.
So.
And I assume that all went
well
with Samson?
Fairly well with him. My wife, and I forgive me for the terminology and stuff here, but she was.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know whether to call it labor or because labor is actually the short period of time at the end or something technically, but basically, she was having contractions for 3 days straight. Right, so she had constant just contractions and whatnot, and her water was broken for a little over 24 hours and whatnot. So that, but luckily we were in a hospital, so they were we were going to do a home birth, but decided to go to the hospital because the baby just wasn't coming after 24 hours, and then another 24 hours, and then another 24 hours. So and then finally the baby came. So it was, again, the most sleepless I've ever been. I stayed up for about 3 days straight, maybe got an hour or two in there, possibly, but,
yeah, I can imagine.
I just kind of felt bad for her, but other than that, Samson was great. I think that one of the, hardest parts with that was, he was definitely a crier, whatnot. We couldn't figure out, what he wanted, but he just cried all the time. Lo and behold, we come to figure out that he's allergic to dairy. So we were like, oh, okay. So this makes sense. And so we just stopped dairy and whatnot. And we still can't quite figure out why he was crying all the time. But he was just colicky kind of, so that was a little difficult. And my wife did deal with some postpartum depression, and whatnot that, we were,
okay.
And luckily she's, well, I don't know if you ever recover from that completely, but she's doing really well. And we've got a good handle on that too.
No, my wife went through some postpartum issues, and I do believe that to some degree it sticks with you, because I think anytime you deal with any form of depression, and clearly I'm no doctor and I'm not a specialist in this in any way, shape, or form, but my personal feeling is that it alters you in some way, and it may change your outlook on things, your effect on things, and how you view things. But there's a definite change there because you're altering the chemicals in the body and the brain. But that's my 2 cents.
They say it's correlated to actually the amount of brain mass involved, because you're putting in so much into the child and whatnot that sometimes it's going to leach from other things. And they found that after pregnancy, there's about a certain percentage reduction of gray matter. And they've actually linked reduction of gray matter into depression. And they found that many antidepressants have a very similar correlation, which is they stimulate neurogenesis, or the creating of new brain cells. So it's kind of one of those little biohacking tidbits.
Oh, okay.
Basically, depression is linked to neurons dying. So you have to figure out why they're dying and try to fix those. So we upped her nutrition a ton. And we definitely gave her good brain foods, good omega-3s, et cetera. But those are all like things that, I enjoyed learning about. And again, it's like when you were in such a desperate position like I was, it can't hurt. It really couldn't hurt because I was either suffering or I was trying something. And which do you choose when you're in that position? Right?
Right. Yeah, you can lay there in the dirt, or you can try and stand up and brush yourself off.
I wasn't going to go down without a fight, and I feel like if I didn't make those choices to try to learn something to help myself and my family, that I would still be pretty crippled. I'd still be full of pain. I'd still have headaches every day, And so it was either deal with that or try something new. And you get pretty brave.
Yeah,
after a while.
absolutely. I bet. Well, I want to thank you
absolutely.
for talking with us and sharing, the it's amazing to me that a lot of the things now, when my daughter went through the hospital situation we went through with her Guillain-Barré syndrome, clearly she was 12 years old. We didn't have to deal with NICU and all those things, but we were in the hospital for 97 days.
That's a long time.
Almost a month of that was in the ICU. So a lot of the things that you were talking about, not only what the beeping of the machines, I remember that all too clearly. As a matter of fact, one of my new things that I do, just little things that help bring me joy. I'm a big music fan, and I started going back and buying vinyl records again.
Cool.
And I bought a record player, and I had forgotten how much I loved the artwork and the liner notes and the feel of dropping the needle and hearing the hissing and the popping of the old records and stuff like that. I have a lot of good memories of that when I was a kid. But up until recently, one of my favorite albums I wasn't able to listen to for a while because I couldn't. Every night when it was my turn to sleep in the room with Kendall, I never slept because for the last 2 months of our stay, we had a room, and the hospital had a couple hotel rooms built into the hospital, and so we had one of those hotel rooms, but when it was my turn to stay in the room, I couldn't sleep because the beeping of the machines and the nurses coming in and out. They were doing their job, and I have no qualms with that whatsoever. I'm very thankful for them. But the anytime the beeping it made me very anxious. So I'd put in my headphones and I would listen to one particular album. And I just bought that album last week. It's been almost a year, and I was just finally able to start listening to it again because I would put whenever that album would start, instantly I was like transported back to the hospital mentally. And so it took me a little bit to kind of get past that. But now I'm starting to enjoy the album again. So
it's so funny how we associate those things. I played a particular phone game while I was in there to pass the time sometimes, and I can't go back to that game now. I can't.
Sure.
I tried for a little bit, and then I was like, "Ooh, too many memories. Not worth it."
Yeah. Every once in a while, it's the album. But I don't know if you ever listened to the artist Beck, but so he's got that album called Morning Phase, and Morning Phase was the album that I listened to every night religiously with earphones in, and that's how I'd go to sleep. So yeah, up until about 2 weeks ago, I couldn't listen to that album at all. Every time the first song would start in, and instantly just there went my brain. So, but yeah, so I can, I can't, there's some things in your story that I can only imagine, but there's a lot that I could identify with. And so, I really do appreciate you coming on and talking to us and sharing this. And I hope that, other people who experience even remotely similar things are able to take some of the advice that you've given.
Yeah.
And really, the gratefulness practice. I love that. I really do. That was one of my gold star moments during your conversation. Making sure that we're grateful for everything that we have.
Yeah.
And everything that we're
to your
given.
point there, we have to make sure we are drawing similarities with what each other has been through too, and we can't let ourselves say, "Well, you just don't understand," because really, what that comes down to, and maybe we have feelings in those moments. We need to acknowledge those. But what I'm saying is, when we do that, we're doing it to ourselves. We isolate ourselves. We then truly do become alone when we tell people that they can't possibly understand what we're going through. But we need to allow people to draw those correlations so that we can have people around us who are sympathetic and or empathetic to what we've been through. We need to let them do that. And in turn, it's going to be therapeutic to us, and it's therapeutic to them too, right? So we need to allow that as humans.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks,
absolutely.
Tim.
So
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
But fantastic. Thank you so much. I really did enjoy this. And
sounds good. My pleasure.
We'll see you around soon, okay?
Yep. Bye.
All right.
Well, that concludes another episode of Focused on Forward. To be a guest of Focused on Forward, you can reach us through Twitter at podcastfof, through our Facebook page named Focused on Forward, or through email focusedonforward@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing each and every one of your stories that has yet to be told. So until then, be safe, be kind, and be loving to one another as you stay focused on forward.